you for your interest in the MMEA 2025 High School All-State Ensemble Survey. My name is Tony Petrus, and I am the current president of MMEA. This video and slideshow, we're going to go over the following areas: the context behind the survey, our budget, amount of ensembles and musicians currently participating in MMEA, and space considerations for our high school all-state experience. Back in 2019, MMEA created its new strategic plan, and part of that was establishing a committee to investigate fiscal health and alternative locations for the conference and all-state festival to minimize financial loss. In general, each year, the concert side was the cost of running the concert was running in a deficit, and we were using conference income to help offset that deficit. And over a period of years, that became less and less financially stable as the cost for running the conference was going up and up. And so in 2022, we also made a bylaws revision at the general membership meeting. A call for service on committees will be made to all MMEA members. And so with that, this fall, we sent out an email to the membership asking for anyone that wants to join our feasibility group that's been working, looking at the data and what's happening in other states to first make the survey and then make recommendations to the board. The idea behind the feasibility group and this bylaw change is that it wouldn't just be the MMEA executive board giving input and making decisions. In actuality, the executive board only meets 6 times a year, and something like this takes a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of this discourse. And so by moving it into a feasibility group, then we have a whole crew of people who are really focused in on this and can spend more time on it and then give recommendations to the board. Back last spring, we sent out a survey to the membership asking for feedback in creating our new strategic plan that we just voted on and are starting to implement. And a couple of the questions on the survey were relative to the all-state experience. And so we wanted to share a couple of the responses. And if you want, you can pause the video and read them. As you can see, there's a variety of opinions, especially if we should go back to 2 days. Should we have housing again? Should we double occupancy or quad occupancy in housing? How should we be making up our ensembles so that we have more participation from across the state, etc. Our feasibility group has been meeting in the fall, and we decided that we really needed a philosophy statement to help guide our work. And so this was a well thought out process and result of that. So if you want to take a moment and just pause the video and you can read the slide. The timeline for our feasibility group, we first met in October, again in November, and some of our outcomes were creating a survey for NAFME Eastern Region MEA presidents to fill out, so that way we can have a better understanding of how the other all-state ensembles are curated throughout the Eastern region of NAFME. And additionally, we worked together to create the following survey that's beneath this video in the job form. And next month, we're going to be looking at the survey results and then giving recommendations to the board. This is actually pretty timely because what we're finding is conference, concert, and rehearsal venues are filling up a year ahead of time. And so it's really important that this February and March, the executive board does its due diligence in researching potential places for us to go to, and we need to sign contracts and stuff like that. So the work actually has to happen right now as we speak. So the MMEA budget for our income drivers are dues. So when you pay your NAFME membership dues, MMEA gets a share of that back to the state. Our conference registration fees, concert audition, registration, and ticket fees, along with t-shirt sales, vendor tables at the conference, and the Mass Music Educators Journal advertisements. I've also linked in here the 2019 to 2020 MMEA budget presentation that was given during the general membership meeting at the All-State Conference. And what's interesting is that this was the last year, right? You may recall if you were here that we just barely made it through Allstate back in 2020. Literally a week later was when school districts were starting to shut down. So the 1920 budget presentation is the most realistic of what it was like for MMEA when we were doing housing and meals for students for 2 days of rehearsal. We were at the Seaport World Trade Center in Boston for both the conference and rehearsals and for housing. And then we were using Symphony Hall on Saturday. So our operating expenses include legal services, insurance, payroll. Our payroll includes part-time executive director, associate executive director, our mass music educators journal editor, and also the designer. Taxes is another thing, and audit. Each year we do an audit. We also have office supplies, production of our quarterly mass music educators journal, which now is online and still costs money to produce that. But we actually have a huge cost savings because we used to print that. And now that it's all digital, it is a huge cost savings for us. Meals for our all-state CNAFME chapters, mass music mentor meetings, and music program leader meetings. We just had our first music program leader meeting, I think, since 2016 or that long. Back in October. And then we have online subscriptions like our website. We use PayPal, Jot Forms, and Avenir, which we use for our all-state audition portal. So conference expenses, the cost of renting the space, audio visual equipment. This year, pretty cool. We are actually purchasing 11 projectors and screens for the majority of the conference rooms, but we're still going to be charged for audio visual for the grand ballroom. We are bringing back utilizing a conference app, and we're moving to an online registration portal that's connected to the conference app for this year's All-State. Housing and food for all the conference committee session strand leaders, along with our collegiate ambassadors. And as I'll bring up later, the cost of the collegiate ambassador program is actually split between the conference and the concert because they help both entities. We have some featured clinician fees, like our keynote speaker, transportation for concert hour performing ensembles, along with this year we added workshop lab ensembles. So if there are student ensembles that are part of the workshop that a clinician is giving, we can help with the transportation fees for that. So back in 2019, 2020, before the pandemic, the conference made income and the concert ran in the deficit. In that specific year, our deficit was $47,038 on the concert side, and that was about $96 per student. So what we were charging students was around $96 less than the actual cost. As we talk to folks across the membership, everyone thinks that Symphony Hall is our largest budget driver, and it actually is not. It is true. When MMEA first made the move to Symphony Hall, we were not charged for the space. And then a few years later, they started charging us, but it is at a reduced rate that we get, which is around $15,000. It costs a lot more to actually rent out Symphony Hall. So they are giving us a deal. But the biggest budget driver for the all-state concert experience is actually meals. So back in 2020, 7 meals for about 500 students, we have between 490 and 500 students each year in All-State, was $150,715. And that was up from around $80,000 in 2008. Housing for 500 students at quad occupancy for 2 nights, that would be Thursday night, Friday night, that was $65,000 back in 2020. Up from $45,000 in 2008. If you look at the bottom right, this is the actual double bedroom that you would find in the Seaport Hotel. And so we were putting 4 students into this room, oftentimes students from different schools that did not know each other, with 2 students per bed. Other constant cost centers that we have, with or without housing, it doesn't matter. Our concert committee, meals and housing, collegiate ambassador, meals and housing. Like I said earlier, we kind of split that with the conference side. conductor accompanist stipends, meals, housing, symphony hall rental, rehearsal space rental, conductor and accompanist fees, equipment, truck rental. We truck across the state for choral risers and percussion equipment, and then sheet music. And we do try to ask the conductors to consider using sheet music from our all-state library when possible to help save some money. So the student fee breakdown for participating in the high school all-state ensembles. Back in 2014, it was around $300. That stuck for a few years, and then it was brought up to $325 in 2017, and in 2020 it was $350. So that was the last time that we were in person. And in actuality, we talked about earlier about the deficit. So the actual cost was somewhere around $480, the total cost for a student to attend. And then in 2021, we were virtual, and so the cost was $20. And 2022 and 23, and this year we're charging $235 with no housing, and that does include lunch on Friday and on Saturday, catered. And we are only doing 1 day of rehearsals, 1 day rehearsal rather, Friday, and then performance on Saturday. So quite different the last few years since we're coming out of the pandemic. So the conference registration fees have stayed pretty stagnant. So back in 2014, if you were a NAFME member, it cost $175 to register for the conference, pre-register rather, and $210 for on-site registration. And it's only gone up slightly over the course of a decade. And this year we're charging $200 for pre-registration, $235 for on-site registration for NAFME members. So though the cost of the conference registration fee has not gone up much, the reality is the cost for running a conference has definitely gone up over the last decade, even with the most recent inflation. So there's less income to use as to help offset the cost of an all-state concert student fee deficit. And what we're thinking is that it's going to be really difficult for us to raise the conference registration fee much more. We think there is a tipping point where it is just too expensive for teachers to attend. So we're sticking to that $235 fee for right now. So meal considerations, since that is the #1 cost driver for all state students. Rehearsal and concert locations require usage of their catering vendors. A lot of folks don't know that, and so they assume that we could just bring in like a music booster group and sell pizza and call it a day. But actually, when we're using spaces like Mechanics Hall or DCU Center or the Seaport or the Sheridan, we are required to use the caterer. We have received some feedback about colleges, and the same thing is true there, where we have to use the college food, and the meals at the colleges have gone up. A few of our districts have used college spaces before and rented them out, and the assumption is that colleges would love to have us because it's free advertising, or they would charge us a reduced rate, so they get to advertise their higher education institution, but it just simply is not panned out, and they're actually charging a lot of money to use their spaces. Catering in general has also risen incredibly with inflation. Just the last couple of years, we were in the NAFME all region meeting for Eastern Division last month, and it was the #1 topic that the presidents were talking about from each of the states, which is the inflation of food costs. The number of students with severe allergies increases each year. We took a look at this year's health forms. It's about 10% of the students have severe food allergies, and so we want to make sure that we're handling that properly, and using a caterer can help us with that. And if we rehearse at a school to bypass required catering, so like having rehearsal at a local high school, for example, students traveling from across the state, that would be really tough for them to have fresh food to eat for lunch and dinner. Housing. So potential housing model, there's double, quad, continuing with no housing, or what we do right now is we actually offer sort of a wedding block where we have a link and you can go to the hotel website and get a reduced rate, but you do it on your own. So students, families, or teachers handle that. We don't actually handle any of that data input from the MMEA side, and we do not have MMEA chaperones who would handle chaperoning overnight accommodations. And then hybrid, we've noticed some states are doing, not mandatory, but they offer housing if you need it. So we asked our pals in the other Eastern region states what they do. In Connecticut, commuting, they have a hybrid model. Commuting students are paying $210, sort of similar to our $235 fee, and then 2 nights hotel is $375. New Hampshire offers options between quad, triple, and double. New Jersey offers quad and double. New York, we're not sure if it's quad or double, but it's $750. Maine has a very interesting model. They split up their all-state experience jazz. They have multiple jazz ensembles, and it happens on a separate weekend, and they use a college campus. The thing that's a little hard for us in using a college campus is that we wouldn't be able to use it till May. And that is a month that's usually filled with senior activities like prom, senior awards, etc. However, we do want to ask the question. And so in the survey, we ask you if you think that using a college in May would work, because the cost of dormitories, would be cheaper probably than using a hotel, though we would have to do the meals straight from that college. So we do want to ask the question. In Maryland, it's $450 plus an $85 fee on top of that. In Pennsylvania, it's $399. And then I took some of the states and just did a fee breakdown here. So Massachusetts, no hotel. We do offer the wedding block if you need it. It's $235, and then you can see it kind of goes up from there by each state. New York being the highest, Maryland $535. Our guess is we would be somewhere between, like if we went back to quad occupancy, we would be somewhere between the like 450 to 550 mark per student. Though we're thinking that it might be best to go double occupancy if we go back to housing. Amount of ensembles and musicians. So we actually do not have that many students participating in Allstate compared to other states with similar populations. We hover between 490 and 500 students participating within the concert band, the orchestra, SATV choir, and jazz ensemble. Here's a breakdown of what all the states in the NAFME Eastern region are currently offering. A lot of states throughout the US are starting to add some type of contemporary ensemble or commercial ensemble, modern band. Additionally, there's guitar ensembles, a cappella groups, more jazz groups, etc. In Massachusetts, again, we just have concert band, jazz band, orchestra, and SATB choir. So we took a look at the data from our all-state auditions. We typically have between 900 and 1,000 students auditioning, with 490 to 500 accepted. And then looking at the 21-22 data, we noticed we had 905 students auditioning, 420 were not accepted. 207 high schools were represented at auditions. And a data point that we never really looked at before was how many schools did not get anybody in. So that year, it was 49 of the 207 high schools had no students accepted, and 36 of the high schools with no students accepted only had one student auditioning. We did look at the 22 to 23 school year data because we thought, oh, we're coming back from COVID. Maybe that data from 21-22 is a little skewed, but it actually was very similar. And so the question the feasibility group had was, how do we increase opportunities so that we have more students participating, but also more of the high schools that are sending students to auditions? How do we ensure that they're getting students into ensembles? And so some ideas that came about in the feasibility group was adding a second jazz band. Similar to our districts in MMEA, having an SSAA choir with around 100 students, slightly increasing the size of the orchestra and the concert band, and adding a contemporary ensemble. In the survey, we go even deeper and ask for things like, like an a cappella group. Do we want a guitar ensemble, etc.? So we would really like your input on that. We believe with the recommendations on this slide that we would increase the amount of students participating by about 165. So total would be around 665 students. And so we look forward to hearing your thoughts on this in the survey. The last time that MMEA added ensembles was way back in 1976. Traditionally, MMEA just hosted concert band, choir, and orchestra. And the Northeastern District was the first of the districts to offer jazz ensemble. And then a few years later, MMEA adopted this at the all-state level. We believe it was probably around 1980 or 81 at Lowell State University when All-State was hosted there. So we took a look. If we were to take some of the recommendations that we gave in the earlier slide, what would the scores look like? Are the scores high enough to have a quality ensemble experience, for example? So here's a snapshot of the 2022 Jazz Band All-State audition scores. Highlighted in green are the folks that made it into the ensemble, and then highlighted in purple are folks that would make All-State if we added a second jazz band. So some special considerations about space. If we want to increase the amount of ensembles or the size of ensembles, we really have to think twice about the location of the concert. And that's because at Boston Symphony Hall, we have to be out by 4 p.m. Each March, MMEA receives a handful of available dates for the following school year that Boston Symphony Hall is available. In each one of those, there's always an evening performance. And so we have to have everything out. We're talking the choral risers, percussion equipment have to go from the stage to the elevator to the basement and back into the truck, and the truck out of the facility. And so with that, it's really restrictive in the amount of time that we have on stage. And we do want to ensure that each of the ensembles gets a little stage time on Saturday to warm up and just get used to the space and do a sound check. And so within each group, they really only have 20 minutes of performance time. And that's super restrictive, especially for the jazz band, and they can't open up and do more soloing. And so there is no more time to add more ensembles. And the size of the stage is also restrictive. Parking is expensive for families. We know that. It's definitely not centrally located in the state. Another thing to think about is that a lot of other all states across the country actually host the concert at the conference grand ballroom. So wherever the conference is located, they take the grand ballroom and transform that into a concert space. We are very lucky in Massachusetts because we have some really amazing acoustic spaces that are both historical and new. So though we love Symphony Hall, it may be time to move, or it may, within the survey, you may say that you think it's really important that we stick at Boston Symphony Hall. And so we really want that feedback. Are we ready to make that move, or is it that we want to stay at Symphony Hall? So our survey asked you about expanding opportunities. Do we need to look at new venues? On the bottom left, that is Mechanics Hall in Worcester. And on the bottom right, that's the Groton Hill Music Center that just opened up recently. Do we want to go back to mandatory housing? 1 night, 2 nights? Do we want to have double or quad occupancy in each of the rooms? What is the financial threshold for families? When is Allstate too expensive? And I want to note that we are trying as best as possible to find sponsors to help drive down the cost of Allstate. But at the end of the day, it is a very expensive endeavor. And so even if we were to get like a $50,000 donation, it's not going to make a a big impact as you might think on the overall cost of running this. And so we look forward to looking at your survey data. We ask that you please submit it by January 15th. And then the feasibility group will take a look at the survey data and give recommendations to the board. And then from there, we'll work on looking at venue spaces for next year and scoping out if we're going to be using hotels again, etc. Thank you for watching this video. And the slideshow is also available in the job form.